Before we dive into today's Wild West tale, thanks for being here. If you enjoy suspenseful stories with mystery and twists, hit like and subscribe so I can keep bringing you more every week. Now, let's begin. They heard a single shot at first light. One hard crack that bounced along the empty street and faded into the hills like a door slamming on a secret. Folks stepped out in their boots and bathrobes, blinking through the cool dawn, waiting to see a body or a broken window. They found neither. The street was clean. No smoke. No shouting. Just the quiet and the wind tugging at the saloon sign. That's when Molly Hart noticed the paper. It was pinned to the saloon door with a .45 slug pressed dead through the middle, the hole neat as a button. The page flapped once, then lay still as the breeze died. Molly wasn't one to nose into trouble, but she'd buried a husband young and learned that trouble doesn't ask permission. It walks right up and takes a seat. She reached past the hole, slid the paper free, and realized her hands were shaking. 3 words were scrawled in black pencil. For the widow. The street went quiet in a new way, as if everyone recognized a line had been crossed, and now they were standing on the wrong side of it. Sheriff Hale stepped forward, tall and sober, palm raised to keep folks back. He had the look of a man who measured his words before he spent them. "Molly," he said, gentle. "You want me to read that first?" She looked down the street where the sun was tipping gold over the ridge. She folded her fear the way she folded laundry, neat and small, then shook her head. "No, Sheriff. If it's for me, it's my weight to carry." She unfolded the paper. The handwriting had the tilt of someone who learned to write late and learned to ride early. It read, "Sunrise, 1 shot, no blood. The name I wore ain't mine. Ask by the old well. If the bucket's wet, ride at dusk. If it's dry, forget me." No signature, no hint. Just a set of directions wrapped in a riddle and tied to Molly's life by those 3 words on the outside. Hale took the page, eyes moving line by line. "Sounds like a drifter playing coy," he murmured. "Or a man trying to set something right," Molly said, surprising herself. The street had gathered more eyes now. Ranch hands, the shopkeeper, a pair of boys with their hair still a mess from bed. Curiosity spreads faster than prairie fire when there's the smell of a story in the air. "Sunrise, 1 shot, no blood," Hale repeated. Someone wanted witnesses, but not a body. He turned to the crowd. "Anybody hear anything else? See any horses riding out?" Heads shook. A few shrugs. A mutter about coyotes. Hale nodded once, decision settling on him like a coat. "All right. Day's young. I'll look to the well. Molly, you don't go near it alone." Molly should have agreed. She should have handed the note back, boiled coffee, swept her porch, and let the law do the walking. But the words for the widow kept circling like a hawk over her thoughts, and the hawk had chosen its rabbit. Her late husband had a way of leaving practical advice behind. Keep the roof patched, keep a clean ledger, keep your word. He never said what to do when a letter used the one title she never asked for, and still had to live with. "I'll come with you," she said. Hale studied her, weighing sense against will. "You ride close," he said, "and if I tell you to stop, you stop." They saddled up. The town breathed again, voices popping back to life. Someone bet $2 the note was a prank. Someone else said the shot came from the ridge, not the street. A few folks drifted to the saloon door, staring at the small, perfectly punched hole where the bullet head had held the page, like the eye of the morning staring back. The trail to the old well cut behind the church and ran along a dry wash that only woke in storm season. The air smelled like dust warming under the sun. Birds flicked from fence post to fence post, staying a safe few breaths ahead of the horses. Hale rode a steady pace, not fast enough to spook, not slow enough to invite second thoughts. "You think this is a trap?" Molly asked, keeping her voice even. "I think whoever wrote that note knows this country and its people," Hale said. "They knew 1 shot would bring eyes. They knew you'd find the paper first." "Why me?" "Because your name carries clean in this town. Folks trust you, If the writer needed a message to move, they picked the right messenger. The old well sat in a dip of ground, ringed in scrub and faded grass. It had been the town's heart long ago, before a deeper one got dug closer to Main Street. Now it was used by travelers who didn't want to be seen, and by coyotes who liked cold water like anyone else. Hale swung down first, scanning the brush, the sky, the ridge lines. Nothing moved but heat and small life. He stepped to the stones and peered into the shaft. "Buckets down," he said. "Can't see if it's wet." Molly tied her mare, walked up slow. The rope was old, but not rotten. The wood handle looked newer, whittled by someone who knew their way around a knife and a quiet afternoon. Hale hauled on the rope. The pulley sighed. The bucket rose, dripping, wet. Molly's heart did something it hadn't done since she was a girl. Skipped for no good reason except that the road ahead suddenly forked and both paths glimmered. She looked at Hale. He didn't smile, didn't frown. He just nodded once. "Dusk," he said. "We'll be ready." Chapter 12. Chapter 32. They set the bucket down, water trembling in its mouth like a secret eager to spill. Hale circled the well, eyes narrowed, reading the ground. "Tracks," he said. "2 horses, maybe 3. But here's the thing." He crouched and touched the dust with 2 fingers. No scuff at the lip. Whoever lowered this didn't lean in. Molly frowned. "How do you work the crank without stepping close?" "You don't," Hale said. He stood scanning outward again, jaw tight. "Unless you didn't use the crank." He followed the rope with his eyes up to the beam, then above, where an old branch stretched from a dead scrub tree, just close enough that a long arm or a hooked line could catch the bucket handle. Hale turned slow, checked the branch, and stopped. A thin scrap of fabric hung from the bark. He plucked it free and rubbed it between thumb and forefinger. "Shirt cuff," he said. "Torn clean. Blue." "Lots of men wear blue out here," Molly said. "Not this shade." Hale held it to the sun. "This is cavalry blue." The word hung in the heat, like a bell that had just been struck. Molly swallowed. "There ain't been cavalry through here in years." "Exactly," Hale said. He stared past the well toward the Badlands, where the land folded into itself like a frown. "So either we're being played by someone who keeps old uniforms, or a man with a history is asking a widow to ride at dusk." The wind picked up, and the bucket's water lapped the rim with a soft, cold sound. Molly looked down into the well, into the dark that gave water and kept secrets. She thought of the gunshot with no blood, the letter with no name, the way the town had held its breath like a church before a vow. She thought of the promise she'd made herself after her husband died, to keep going, but only toward the truth. "Dusk, then," she said quietly. Hale nodded once. "Dusk." He didn't say the other thing he was thinking, but Molly felt it anyway, sharp as a thorn. If the bucket was wet now, who pulled it up last, and why did he want the widow to be the one who came? When they turned back toward town, a dark shape watched from the ridge, still as a thorn bush. It wasn't a man. It wasn't a horse. And when the sun slid across it, it left no shadow at all. That was the first sign something in this story didn't belong to the living. Molly Hart had always known that words carry weight, but she didn't realize how heavy they could feel until the town went back to its chores and left her with the memory of that letter. 3 words, for the widow, echoed in her chest like the beat of a second heart, one she never asked for but couldn't silence. By late afternoon, she sat on her porch with her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee, watching dust drift along the road. Her mare pawed the dirt, restless as though it too knew dusk was waiting with something it wasn't eager to give. Sheriff Hale had promised he'd be ready, but Molly didn't feel the same comfort others did in his steady ways. She respected him, sure, trusted him more than most, but she also knew he held secrets like a safe, and some locks aren't meant to be opened. The sun slid lower, painting the windows gold, and Molly felt her stomach knot. She whispered, almost to herself, "If a man leaves me a letter, I'll see what truth he carried, good or bad." That's a promise. At the sheriff's office, Hale had spread the note across his desk, a lantern burning beside it. He'd read it a dozen times, tracing the letters with his eyes, not his fingers, as though touching it might disturb the trail it was laying out. Deputy Clay leaned against the wall, chewing on a straw. Could be a prank, some drifter looking for fun. Hale shook his head. Pranks don't carry this kind of silence. Whoever wrote this, he's either warning us or calling us. Calling who? Hale glanced at the note again. The widow. Clay frowned. That's cruel, Sheriff. Dragging her into this. Hale sighed, rubbing his jaw. Maybe not cruel. Maybe deliberate. Somebody thinks she's the only one who'd follow through. Dusk. When the time came, Molly was already saddled. The town whispered as she rode with Hale out past the edge of Main Street, shadows stretching long across the ground. Behind curtains and in doorways, eyes followed. Curiosity laced with fear. Folks wanted answers, but none were brave enough to ride beside them. The trail carried them toward the Badlands. Rocks cast jagged silhouettes, and the air cooled quick. Molly tried to read the land the way her husband once taught her. Watch for movement, watch for what doesn't fit. But everything seemed wrong. Too still, too quiet. As the last of the sun dipped behind the ridge, Hale lifted his hand. They stopped. The well lay a few paces ahead, the bucket still damp from morning. And beside it, leaned against the stones, was a satchel. Molly dismounted first, against Hale's warning. She crouched, brushing the dust from the flap. Her breath caught when she saw the mark, an army insignia, worn, almost rubbed away. She looked up at Hale, her eyes wide. Cavalry, he nodded grimly. Just like the cuff. Molly opened the satchel. Inside was a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. She unwrapped it, slow, careful. A folded uniform, a revolver with no bullets, and beneath them, a single envelope with her name. Her hands shook as she tore it open. The letter inside was brief, hurried, the pencil strokes heavy. If you read this, I am already gone. My true name is buried deeper than this town's well. I wronged men who will come looking. You deserve to know before they arrive. I was not who I claimed. But the truth lies in the barn at midnight. Only the widow will understand. Molly read it twice, then 3 times, the words sinking like stones in her chest. She whispered, "Midnight." Hale frowned. "Barn?" "Not just any barn," Molly said. Her voice steadied as realization took root. "He means the Heart Barn, a shadow on the ridge." As they packed the satchel, Hale's eyes cut to the horizon. Just for a flicker, he saw it again. The same figure from before, still as a statue, watching. But when he blinked, it was gone. "Sheriff?" Molly asked. "Nothing," he lied, though the chill crawling up his spine told him it was something. He mounted his horse, gaze fixed on the path back to town. Midnight was coming, and with it, the truth. Or something darker. By the time Molly and Sheriff Hale returned with the satchel, the town was buzzing like a kicked beehive. They hadn't even tied their horses when Mrs. Dillard, who ran the cafe, leaned out the doorway, apron dusted in flour. "You two find something?" she called, her voice half hope, half fear. Hale gave her the same answer he gave everyone, a look that told them not to ask again. But folks around here had long memories and sharp tongues, and by the time the pair stepped inside for coffee, the whispers had already started. At the back corner of the cafe, 3 ranch hands hunched over mugs, voices low but urgent. "Cavalry blue, that's what they said," one muttered. "Don't mean nothing." "Could be old cloth," another countered. The third shook his head. "You think a widow gets named in a note like that for no reason? Whoever wrote it knows her." Molly pretended not to hear, though her stomach knotted tighter with each word. The cafe smelled of bitter coffee and fried potatoes, but the taste of dust and mystery clung to her tongue. The widow's dilemma. She sat across from Hale, who poured sugar into his cup but didn't stir. His eyes stayed on her, steady, searching. "You don't have to carry this," he said. But I already do, Molly answered. The moment I read that note, Hale nodded, as if he expected that. He slid the folded letter across the table between them. The barn at midnight. If he means yours, that's your land. But it's also danger he's leading straight to your door. Molly wrapped her hands around the mug. The warmth seeped into her palms, but not into her bones. Then I'd rather face it head-on than wonder forever. Town talk. As the cafe door swung open and shut with each customer, the rumors grew like weeds. Some said the shot at dawn had been a warning from bandits. Others claimed it was a ghost from the old war, come back for unfinished business. And one man swore he saw a figure on the ridge, a shadow that stood too still to be human. Spirits don't shoot bullets, someone scoffed. Maybe not, the man said, but I know what I saw. The whole room hushed for a beat, then broke into uneasy laughter. Still, no one met each other's eyes for long. Midnight looms. By the time Molly left the cafe, night was creeping fast. The stars were sharp, and the moon rode low, cutting pale shapes out of barns and fences. Her barn stood darker than the rest, its big doors like a mouth waiting to speak. Hale joined her at the edge of the property, rifle slung loose but ready. His face was calm, but his shoulders carried the weight of every choice they were about to make. "You sure?" he asked. Molly lifted the satchel, feeling the weight of the uniform and revolver inside. He said only the widow would understand. If I walk away now, I'll never forgive myself. The barn groaned softly as the wind pressed against its boards. Somewhere inside, something shifted. Too heavy for mice, too soft for horses. Molly drew a slow breath. Then let's open it. Hale reached for the latch. The metal clinked, echoing louder than it should have in the night air. He pulled. The doors creaked wide. Inside, moonlight spilled over hay bales and beams, casting long shadows. At first, nothing seemed out of place, until Molly's eyes caught on a box set in the center of the floor, waiting. On the lid, in the same rough handwriting, a single word: truth. And just as Hale stepped toward it, a low voice came from the dark rafters above. "You're late." The voice dropped from the rafters like a stone in a well, low, steady, and too calm for the chill it carried. Molly froze, her pulse pounding in her ears. Hale swung his rifle up toward the shadows overhead. The barn was still except for the faint rustle of straw. And then a figure shifted, stepping into the pale spill of moonlight. He wasn't young. His hair had gone mostly gray, his beard rough, his coat worn thin from travel. But his eyes, sharp, restless, burning with a kind of tired fire, never left Molly's face. "You came," he said. His voice wasn't cruel, wasn't kind either. More like a man who had been waiting too long for an answer. "Who are you?" Hale demanded. The man ignored him, gaze locked on Molly. "You got my letter." Molly steadied her breath. "I did. You said you weren't who you claimed. Then tell me, who are you really?" The man shifted, and something creaked above them. He moved down the ladder slow, deliberate, until his boots touched the dirt floor. "I was called many things," he said. "Soldier, deserter, drifter. But the name I wore here, it wasn't mine to wear." Hale's jaw clenched. "You left a town spooked, a widow dragged into danger, and you think riddles are enough?" The man looked past Hale like he wasn't there. The truth was buried. She deserves to know what's planted in her own soil. The box. Molly's eyes darted back to the box on the floor. The word truth stared up at her like a dare. She crouched, hands trembling as she lifted the lid. Inside was a stack of letters, folded neat, bound with string. Underneath them, photographs. Faces she didn't recognize. Men in uniforms, a few women and children standing outside tents. And at the very bottom, a single journal, leather cover cracked and brittle. Molly picked it up. The first page was scrawled in that same rough hand. "If I die, let the widow know I carried her husband's debt." He was not the man she thought. Neither was I. But between us lies the truth. Her throat went dry. She looked up at the stranger. "What debt?" The man's eyes softened, just barely. The kind that makes a man trade his name for silence. Tracks that shouldn't be there. Before Hale could press him, a sharp crunch came from outside the barn. Boots in the dirt. Too many to be just one man. Hale raised his rifle, face tightening. The stranger glanced toward the door, then back at Molly. They followed me. The ones I tried to outrun. That's why I left the note. Not for riddles, because when they come, they'll burn everything to ash unless you understand. Molly's stomach twisted. She thought of the water bucket at the old well, the torn cuff of cavalry blue, the satchel left like bait. You wanted me to see this before they got here. The man nodded once. Because your name, your husband's name, was tied to mine. They'll use that. They'll come for you too. Outside, another crunch of boots. Closer now. Shadows moved across the cracks in the barn wall, flickers of lantern light cutting through. Hale whispered, "Molly, stay behind me." But Molly couldn't move, not yet. Her fingers clutched the journal, knuckles white, as the barn filled with silence so heavy it seemed ready to break. The man's voice came again, low but firm. "When the first shot comes, you'll have to choose. Believe me, or believe the lawman." And then, 3 knocks on the barn door. The 3 knocks echoed through the barn like a judge's gavel. Slow, deliberate, promising no good outcome. Hale leveled his rifle at the door, jaw tight, shoulders squared. Molly felt her chest lock, every breath stiff. The stranger didn't flinch. "Open!" a voice outside barked. It carried the sharp tone of command, the kind drilled into men who'd once worn uniforms. Hale didn't move. He just called back, steady as stone. "State your business." Silence followed, long enough to stretch every nerve inside the barn. Then the voice returned, colder. "You got something belongs to us. Hand it over and maybe the widow keeps her roof." Molly's grip on the journal tightened. Her roof, her land, her life were all caught in the net of men she'd never met. The stranger shook his head slowly. "You can't bargain with them, Sheriff. They ain't here to talk." Hale cut him a glare. "You brought this trouble here." The man answered without hesitation. "And you brought yours." A sheriff's shadow. The words hung heavier than the knocks had. Molly looked at Hale. His rifle didn't waver, but something in his eyes did. For the first time she saw not the lawman, but the man beneath, the one who carried his own unspoken debt. "What does he mean?" Molly asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Hale didn't answer right away. Instead, he motioned her toward the far wall. "Stay low. If they break in, you head for the back stall and run." But Molly pressed. What did he mean? The stranger stepped forward, half in shadow, half in moonlight. "Your sheriff wasn't always a sheriff. He wore blue once too, same shade as me, same company. We marched together, and we buried the same lies." Hale's face hardened, but he didn't deny it. Molly's heart pounded. "So you knew each other?" "We knew enough," the stranger said. Another knock rattled the wood. This one followed by a shove that shook the door against its latch. The breach. Hale lowered his voice, urgent. "Molly, listen to me. These men, they're not after you. They're after what he carries. You give me that journal, I can end this." But the stranger cut in, his tone sharper than a blade. "If you hand it over, they'll kill you anyway. The journal proves what we did in uniform. Names, dates, orders. It's the kind of truth men bury with bodies. If they burn it, the past disappears. That's all they want." Molly looked down at the journal, the leather cover cracked like old skin, her hands trembling over it. 1 book, 2 men, both claiming to protect her, but both tied to the same shadow. Outside, a command barked. Then came the sound of boots shifting, rifles clattering. "Last chance!" the voice roared. Molly's eyes darted between Hale and the stranger. One wore the badge, the other the burden. And both stared at her like her choice would decide not just the night, but the story itself. Then, with no warning, the barn door splintered. Lantern light poured in, silhouetting 3 figures with rifles raised. The first shot thundered. The first shot split the air, sharp as lightning. Wood splinters flew from the barn door where the bullet struck. Horses outside whinnied and pulled against their reins. Hale fired back, the muzzle flash lighting his face for an instant, hard, unflinching, almost desperate. The barn filled with smoke and echoes, the smell of gunpowder thick as a storm cloud. Molly ducked behind a hay bale, clutching the journal to her chest. Her heart hammered louder than the gunfire. She heard Hale shout something, but the words tangled with the chaos. The stranger moved like a man who had lived this moment before. He didn't fire. Instead, he grabbed a pitchfork from the wall and used it to shove a bale in front of Molly, shielding her from the open door. Then he crouched low, whispering, "Stay down, widow." They don't care who they hit. Fire and lantern light. Another shot cracked. Lantern glass shattered, spilling fire across the dirt floor. Flames licked at loose straw, growing fast, snapping like angry teeth. The barn, once silent and secret, became a cage of smoke and heat. Hale barked, "Molly, out the back, now." But the stranger caught her arm before she could move. "They'll circle. You'll walk straight into their sights." Molly's eyes darted between them, panic rising. "Then what do we do?" The stranger's gaze cut to the journal. "The truth they fear, it's in your hands. If you run, guard it. If you stay, decide who you believe." Hale's voice came hard through the haze. "Don't listen to him. He's dragged death into this town. Give me the book, Molly. Let me bury it before the fire takes us all." Tracks in the ash. Smoke curled thick now, making every breath a fight. Molly pressed her sleeve to her mouth, eyes burning. She staggered toward the back stall, the journal heavy as iron in her grip. Her boot struck the dirt floor, and that's when she saw it. Tracks. In the dust where no one had walked since morning, fresh footprints wound toward the rear wall. Too light to belong to Hale or the stranger. Too many to be just one man. They'd already been inside. Molly froze, staring. The prints ended at the wall, but the boards bore no mark of opening. It was as though whoever left them had stepped straight into the wood itself. The fire popped behind her. Hale's voice shouted again. The stranger cursed under his breath. Molly's pulse thundered as she realized someone else was here. Someone neither man had seen. The midnight choice. "Molly!" Hale roared. He was closer now, his shadow cutting through the smoke. "Hand it over before you burn with it." "No," the stranger snarled. "If she hands it over, the truth dies here." Same as before. The flames roared higher, crawling up beams, devouring old hay. Heat pressed close, sweat stinging her skin. And there she stood, between two men bound by the same past, a journal that could shatter it, and footprints in the ash that belonged to neither. The barn groaned, timbers cracking under fire's hunger. In the chaos, Molly's voice rang out, trembling but clear. "I'll decide who deserves the truth. Not you." Both men froze, eyes locked on her. And above the roar of fire, from somewhere unseen, came a sound that didn't belong. 3 slow knocks, just like before. But this time, they came from inside the barn. The 3 knocks echoed inside the burning barn. Low, hollow, and wrong. They didn't come from the door. They didn't come from the rafters. They came from the far corner where the fire hadn't touched yet, where the shadows pooled deeper than they should. Molly clutched the journal tighter, her breath sharp in the smoke. Hale swung his rifle toward the sound. The stranger froze, his face drained of color. "That ain't them outside," he rasped. "That's something else." The barn groaned, beams cracking, sparks raining down. Yet the knocks came again, 3, slow, deliberate. A secret unearthed. Molly staggered toward the sound, ignoring Hale's shout to stop. The footprints she'd seen earlier, they led right here, to the dark boards along the back wall. She crouched, brushing her palm across the dirt. The ground was loose, freshly turned. Her heart pounded as her fingers clawed through the dirt. It wasn't long before she struck wood, a small box, buried shallow. Smoke swirled around her, but she pulled until it came free, coughing as she dragged it into the light of the fire. The box was marked with the same scrawl as before, Widow. Molly's hands trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside lay another journal, older than the first, its pages yellow and brittle. On top was a folded scrap of paper with just 2 words. Forgive me. She flipped open the first page and her blood ran cold. The handwriting wasn't the stranger's. It wasn't Hale's. It was her husband's. The weight of names. Her vision blurred as she read the lines, words that cut deeper than bullets. If this ever finds you, I ain't the man you thought. My name was borrowed, my life a debt. The truth belongs to her, the widow. She deserves to know whose name she carries. Molly swayed, the fire's heat mixing with the flood of betrayal. Her husband's secrets weren't gone with him. They were alive, buried here, waiting for her to dig them up. The stranger stepped forward, voice low. Now you see. He and I, we were tied in ways you never knew. We wore the same false colors, fought the same false war. But the lies, he buried them on your land. Hale's voice thundered over the fire. Enough! She don't need ghosts to carry, she needs to live. But his face told another story. He knew, he had known all along. The knock returns. The barn crackled, flames climbing higher, smoke choking the air. Molly held both journals, her husband's and the stranger's, their truths heavy in her arms. Then, knock, knock, knock. This time it came not from the corner, but from beneath the barn floor itself. The ground shuddered, faint but real. Hale's grip on his rifle tightened. The stranger muttered a curse, his eyes darting to the dirt. Molly's voice trembled, but she forced it steady. Whatever is buried here, it's not done with us. The fire roared louder, beams sagging, ready to collapse. Hale shouted, "We've got to get out!" But Molly's eyes stayed fixed on the ground where the last knock echoed, a place that seemed to breathe with secrets. She whispered, almost to herself, "Then we dig deeper." And as the barn threatened to fall, the stranger leaned close and said one last thing, his words like ice. "You're about to learn why no man wanted to keep his own name." The barn sagged under the weight of fire, timbers snapping like gunshots. Sparks rained down, smoke clawed at throats. Hale grabbed Molly's arm, pulling hard toward the back door. "Out, now!" he barked, but Molly dug in her heels. Both journals weighed heavy against her chest, heavier than any rifle. The knock still echoed in her ears, rattling her bones. She pointed to the dirt where the sound had come from. "There's something under here," she shouted through the smoke. "If we leave it, the truth burns with the rest." The stranger staggered beside her, coughing, eyes wild. He ripped open the buried box fully, tossing aside scraps of earth, until his hand struck metal. With a grunt, he yanked it free, a revolver. But when he flipped the chamber open, it was empty. Not a single bullet. Molly stared, confused. Why hide a gun with no bullets? The stranger's face hardened. Because this gun ain't meant to fire, it's meant to be found. A weapon without a shot. Hale's eyes narrowed on the weapon. Even in the firelight, Molly saw recognition spark there. "That piece," Hale growled. "I've seen it before." The stranger nodded grimly. "We all did. Cavalry issued it to our captain the night he signed the orders. The ones that left men buried without markers. This gun's a witness. The empty chamber's the proof. He never fired a shot. But the blood still came." Molly's heart twisted. "And my husband?" The stranger's voice cracked, just barely. "He carried it once. Said he'd never load it, never let it speak lies with lead. But he couldn't bear to destroy it either. So he buried it here. Buried the guilt with it." The fire's hunger. The roof gave a terrible groan, half the rafters crashing down in a shower of sparks. Flames leapt across the hay, clawing closer. The barn was seconds from collapsing. Hale shoved forward, grabbing the revolver from the stranger's grip. "Enough talk. We can't drag the past out of a fire. We live or we die." But Molly stepped between them, eyes blazing through the smoke. "No, we carry the past, or it carries us. If this gun and these journals hold the truth, then running means nothing. I won't let it all burn." The stranger locked eyes with her, respect flickering through the soot and sweat. Hale's jaw tightened, torn between duty and secrets too old to bury. Outside, the pounding of boots grew louder. The men with rifles hadn't gone. They were waiting for the fire to finish their work. The widow's stand. Molly lifted the revolver from Hale's hand, the weight cold and hollow. She held it high, voice clear and steady despite the chaos. "This gun may be empty, but it's heavier than any bullet. It carries every name you men buried, every lie you wore, and now it carries mine." The fire roared, sparks swirling around her like stars in a burning sky. For a heartbeat, even Hale and the stranger went silent, watching her as though the widow had become something more, something the past couldn't silence. Then, from beneath the floor, the final knock came. Harder, louder. The ground split. Ash and dirt sprayed upward, revealing not just wood, but the mouth of a hidden tunnel, leading straight back toward the old well. The stranger whispered, awed and afraid all at once. "He dug a way out." And before Hale could answer, the floor beneath them buckled. The floor gave way with a thunderous crack, swallowing dust, dirt, and the echoes of fire. Molly tumbled forward, clutching the journals and the empty revolver tight to her chest as she slid down into darkness. Hale and the stranger followed, landing hard in the cool earth of a hidden tunnel. Above, the barn collapsed in a storm of flame and smoke, sealing them off from the night sky. For a moment, silence pressed close, broken only by the hiss of burning wood overhead and Molly's ragged breath. Hale lifted his lantern, its flame trembling. The tunnel stretched ahead, dug with care, shored with old timbers. It led straight toward the direction of the well, but the ground was marked. Fresh prints scattered across the dirt floor, small, sharp, and barefoot. Molly's heart clenched. These aren't yours." The stranger shook his head, eyes narrowing. "No, and they ain't the soldiers outside either. These prints don't belong to any living man." Shadows in the tunnel. They moved forward, each step echoing louder than it should. Molly tried to steady her breath, but every flicker of lantern light made the shadows twitch along the walls. The prints led deeper, twisting left, then right, as though whoever made them knew the tunnel like their own skin. Yet something was wrong. The steps ended suddenly, in the middle of the passage. No turn, no doorway, just gone. Hale crouched, brushing his fingers over the dirt. Tracks don't vanish. Not unless... He stopped. His hand shook. "Not unless what?" Molly pressed. "Not unless he never left this place," the stranger finished. His voice was low, hollow. "The man without footprints. The one we buried but never saw dead." The past steps forward. Molly's grip tightened on the journals. "You're saying this is someone you knew?" Both men were silent, the kind of silence that admits more than words ever could. Then, ahead in the dark, came that sound again. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. This time not on wood, but on the very earth around them. Hale raised his rifle. The stranger drew his knife. Molly lifted the lantern higher, her voice breaking the hush. "Show yourself." The air shifted. A shape emerged at the far end of the tunnel, tall, gaunt, draped in rags of cavalry blue that clung like gravecloth. His face was shadowed, but his steps made no sound, not even the crunch of dirt. The man without footprints, the unwelcome truth. He stopped a few paces away, silent, still. Then he lifted his hand and pointed, not at Hale, not at the stranger, but at Molly. Her blood ran cold. She clutched the revolver tighter, the journals pressed against her ribs. The figure's voice seeped into the tunnel, rough and broken, as if dragged from the bottom of a well. "The widow holds the name. The widow decides who lives with the truth." And then, as the lantern flickered, the figure dissolved into shadow, leaving nothing but the echo of his words and the fresh prints that now circled all 3 of them. Molly's breath caught. For the first time she realized, The past wasn't chasing them. It was inside the tunnel with them, demanding judgment. The stranger whispered, almost reverent, "He ain't dead. He never was." Hale's jaw tightened, his voice barely holding steady. "Or worse, he is, and he's not done with us." Molly stared at the prince, her voice steady despite the quake in her chest. "Then at sunrise, I'll give him what he came for." The tunnel trembled, the earth groaning as though it agreed. The tunnel spat them out, just as the first gray of dawn touched the horizon. Molly stumbled into the cold air, soot-streaked and trembling, clutching both journals and the empty revolver. Behind her, Hale dragged himself up, shoulders heaving. The stranger followed, coughing hard, his knife still clutched, though the fight had passed them by. They stood at the mouth of the old well, the very place the first letter had sent them. The bucket rope creaked softly in the morning breeze, swaying like a pendulum marking judgment. And then, knock, knock, knock. This time the sound came from inside the well. Molly's stomach clenched. She stepped closer, the journals pressed to her chest. Hale caught her arm, his voice low, pleading, "Don't. Whatever's down there, let it stay buried." But the stranger shook his head. Buried truths don't stay quiet. They claw their way back up, always. The widow's choice. Molly leaned over the stones. The well was dark, deep, swallowing the dawn light whole. The knocking came again, rising up the shaft, steady as a heartbeat. She closed her eyes, whispered a prayer she hadn't spoken since her husband's funeral, and lowered the revolver on its rope. The bucket rattled as it went down. When she hauled it back up, the gun sat inside, chamber still empty. But scrawled across the handle in wet black pencil was a single word. Name. Molly's breath shook. She understood. The journals told half the story. The revolver told the rest. But now the past demanded her judgment. Whose name would be tied to the sins buried beneath this town? The second name. She turned to Hale first. "You knew. You marched under the same flag. You buried the same lies." Hale's eyes hardened. "I did. But I stayed. I kept order when no one else would. I tried to build something decent out of what we broke." She turned to the stranger. "And you left riddles, shadows, fear. You dragged it all back when you could have stayed gone." The stranger's jaw tightened. "Because silence is worse than death. I wanted you to know what your husband carried, so you could choose to forgive or condemn." The sun crested the ridge, spilling gold across the land. The light caught Molly's face, streaked with ash and tears, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then she lifted the revolver high. "My husband carried this. My husband dug the tunnel. My husband buried the truth. His name is the one tied to it, not mine." Her voice rang clear. "And now his name ends with me. I bury it, but I carry no guilt. I will be known by my own name, Molly Hart." The knock fades. As her words echoed, the knocking stopped. The well grew still. The air shifted, lighter, as though the shadow that haunted them had finally been heard. The stranger bowed his head, eyes wet. Hale exhaled, shoulders heavy but relieved. For the first time since dawn broke with a shot and no blood, the world was quiet. Molly dropped the revolver back into the well. It vanished into the dark, swallowed by silence. She turned, holding both journals tight. The truth doesn't belong to ghosts. It belongs to the living, and I'll decide how it's told. Hale met her eyes, nodding once. "Then you'll carry more weight than any lawman ever could." The stranger stepped back toward the ridge. "You've done what we couldn't. Maybe now the past will rest." Molly stood alone by the well, the sun rising at her back, her voice steady as she whispered the last words to herself. "I am the widow no longer. I am Molly Hart." And for the first time in years, the name felt like her own. And that's the end of our story. If you enjoyed this Wild West mystery and want more tales filled with suspense, twists, and unforgettable characters, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep these stories alive, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below about what you think really happened, or what kind of story you'd like to hear next. Until then, thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next tale.